Well, it's there with a step.
Good, how are you?
And if you
No, she says,
Yes.
you know what?
She replied to an email. Still working.
Still no baby.
No pressure.
I'm sure she's stealing.
But my third round. Others request for.
No.
Thank you for participating in today's meeting. If attending in person, please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room. And please silence all devices. Click on the globe at the bottom of your screen to select either English or Spanish. Public comment will be taken after each item. If you are in the auditorium and wish to comment, please use the iPads located in the lobby. For meetings and other locations, please complete a blue speaker card and provide it to a South Coast AQMD employee. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all agenda items. Times may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. More time will be allotted for Spanish translation that is not simultaneous. For questions or issues on making public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. That's 909-396-3247. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Be aware that this meeting is being recorded. You authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your February Board Assistance Briefing. Okay, everyone have our agenda for the day. I think it kind of repeats itself similarly. We'll be going over first over the March 1st board meeting agenda. Before we jump into there, those who are actively involved with the admin committee, you'll note that there are two changes to the agenda since the admin committee. The first one is the removal of our Rule 1146.2 from the set hearing. We're going to be setting that the following month. So we moved that a little 1 month away. So you'll see that that's not in the March 1st agenda, and that was for a reason. The second one is we added in a new agenda item, number 24, I believe it is, regarding the professional units bargaining agreement. We're still pending on their vote, and then it gives at least right now it'll give the board the opportunity to discuss. Okay. Any questions so far? All right, great. So let's just jump into the March 1st agenda. We'll go, as we normally do, we'll start with the public hearings. First off, for the agenda item number 21, I believe Dr. Sang-Mi Lee will brief us on that item.
Good morning. So this item is about the Coachella Valley contingency measure safety without the different standard. So the contingency measure is one of the many state planning requirements set by the Federal Clean Air Act and the EPA rule. But also this requirement is specific for non-opinion area and then the standard. So this item is for Coachella Valley and for 2008 ocean standard. So I also have to give attention, and this is different from the recent contingency measure plan the EPA proposed to disapprove. That one is for South Coast Basin and 1997 ocean standard. So to comply with the EPA's requirement, we developed the contingency measure program, and we plan to include it in one of our rules, which Rule 463. So if contingency is needed, then it will require more frequent inspection of the liquid, organic liquid storage tanks to detect potential leaks and repair it. So we released the staff report last month. We had a 30-day public comment. And then we also hosted a public consultation meeting. And then this is the final package will lead to the next board meeting for board consideration and adoption.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Any questions with regard to this action item? Yes.
The requirements, do they involve emissions that the Coachella Valley have to reduce their emissions to meet?
Right. So that's why we needed the contingency. So it's if not attaining in the Coachella Valley, these would be the trigger mechanisms.
Because the attainment is all based on SCAD emissions. I mean,
That is
true.
go ahead.
And I just want to give you an example of how they struggle to not be exceeded. In this, last year, this is a day in August, and they had a high 0.093. That's a problem. The next day, though, the ozone level hadn't gone any lower than 0.06 by midnight. And by 4 a.m. they were exceeding the 8 hour. And they exceeded that for another 16 hours. All because of emissions from SCAD. Their emissions are virtually non-existent. Why does the EPA require a air basin that's getting all their problems from another air basin to transport it? Have to do things, what do you know, it's not gonna do it, darn thing.
Well, we have recognized that there's transport emissions,
I'm
right?
sure you do.
But and we've addressed those again in the past, but I do recall that EPA also has concerns about the actual area that's not in attainment to address those locally, in those areas. But when it comes to this contingency, I wanted Dr. Lee just to kind of touch on the South Coast, what we're doing in there as well.
So yeah, your observation is correct. So the majority of the ocean power in Coachella Valley is transported from South Coast Basin. So when we are developing strategy to attain the standard in Coachella Valley, we do rely on the emission reduction in South Coast Basin. But when it comes to contingency measure, EPA has very specific requirement that the emission reductions to be used for contingency measure has to be within the non-attainment area. That means Coachella Valley. So this contingency measure is the additional measure to the older attainment strategies or regulations already in place. So additional measure to kick in if the area fails to attain or fails to make a reasonable progress toward the attainment. But then in reality, areas like Coachella and South Coast, we have the most stringent regulation in the nation. So there is little to no opportunity to define contingency measure. However, we still have to do it, especially for this item. If we don't do it, we get sanctioned. Sanction could kick in as early as April of this year. So we have gone through really painful exercise to identify the potentials for contingency measure. This measure was identified, but then we also considering to requiring South Coast to do the similar things to reduce water emission reductions.
See, one of the problems Coachella has and some of the other stations in the far eastern part of the SCAB is that they don't have enough localized NOx. And without localized NOx, their emission ozone, if they have a high previous day, it doesn't go down very far. It lack of NOx in those areas, like Palm Springs, where this is not just a unusual thing that I told you about. That happens every year where they will have a large number of hours where they're exceeding because reducing their NOx may even exacerbate their ozone issues. Do you agree with that in some ways?
So transport is definitely an issue in Coachella Valley, but then eventually the enough NOx reductions in South Coast and then strategic VOC reductions will reduce the levels in ozone and reduce the exposure.
So I think it's important to recognize that a lot of what is being discussed here is being driven by court decisions. And what the courts have decided is that contingency is something that has to exist. You can't just say, hold it out, right? But the challenge that we have is that because we're extreme non-attainment, we do everything. We do all feasible measures. And it was the court decision that brought this about. So for this particular effort, we're hoping, fingers crossed, I think Dr. Lee and her team looked at that this will never have to be implemented. But we're doing it because of a requirement that exists in the courts. So all your points, we hear it. There's a whole issue about the Clean Air Act and whether it needs to be revised to reflect reality. But this is what we got to do. So this is what we're doing in response to it.
I understand. But for instance, I know that we're doing everything we can. We don't have much that we can do further in regard to our industrial folks, maybe area wide, maybe. But the industrial folks, according to the AQMD in 2018, they were responsible for 6% of the NOx they put up. According to the, they can't do much more, and yet they go after the industrial, say you gotta do more, you gotta do more. And then the thing that was really annoying was, I am paraphrasing it, is that the EPA said, don't tell us what to do. You don't have the right to tell us what to do. Maybe they don't have the right, look at the, their authority to tell us what to do.
Well, I don't think we would agree with that,
Oh.
but I hear your point. And the fact is, we're moving forward. We're doing everything we can. This was a measure that we believe satisfies the requirements put upon us. Let's move out of the risk of sanctions.
And this one will meet the standard probably in 3 or 4 years.
Well, there's a lot going on with EPA right now, and there's a lot of frustration. You're expressing a lot of that frustration, but many other areas around the United States have that same frustration. So, we talked about what we're doing in DC. I think there's an opportunity to address some of them. But for this particular effort, we hear you. We've got a solution. I'm not sure there's much more that we can do.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Anybody know if the Colmac wood burning plant still operates out there near Mecca?
As far as I know, it does, yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
goes by another name now.
it's on Native American land, so.
Call, oh, really? I didn't know.
Difference.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ron, for the comments. Okay, next up, we're going to look at agenda item 22, the annual reclaim audit report for the 2022 year. Jason.
Good morning, everyone. This is our routine annual reclaim audit report for compliance year 2022. So compliance goes out and does audit of all reclaim facilities to make sure they're complying with their emission caps under the reclaim program. We had 17 NOx facilities that exceeded their caps. We reconcile that for the process of reconciling those holdings. As we went through, it continued effect of the reclaim NOx shave is still causing trading credit prices to be high. Staff did that analysis last year, and the board concurred with the recommendation that the compliance and enforcement aspects of the rule should, of the regulation should stay the same. And the deterrent effects are still sufficient for the program, but prices are coming down. And staff will be recommending to hold to that original analysis, and then also reclaim shows program and compliance with all other aspects of the program. So it's working as designed for the generic NOx and SOx emission reductions. Answer any questions you may have.
Great. Any questions for Jason? All righty then.
My whole 401k in RTCs, is that a good investment?
Not that one. Okay, great. So let's move on to agenda item number 23 this is TAO's presentation on the Clean Fuels Program. Aaron.
Yeah, every year as part of the Clean Fuels Program, we're required to submit to the legislator the report for what we did the past year and what we're planning on doing this following year. There is a focus for next year. So just some summary includes some key items here from the past year. We continue to administer some large zero emission truck projects like JetZ. This next week in NFI, there'll be an event that's going to have celebrating their 50 trucks. Their charging infrastructure. There was an event at Schneider last June where they have now 90 zero emission trucks at their facility. As part of this program, we are also starting to focus heavily on infrastructure. That is a limiting factor right now for a lot of the zero emission transportation side of things. And so, just in summary, looking at this next year, we're going to continue to focus on infrastructure. We're going to have a mix of hydrogen, battery electric type transportation focus. This past year, we did only spend 1.4 million out of the Clean Fuels Fund, which is very low. In part, that is because we've submitted 12 proposals, grant proposals this past year. We were awarded $94 million for these awards. We have 5 pending right now with the Resources Board. So waiting to get that back, but we do have to catch up this next year and the year after to start to focus more on the Clean Fuels program. So with that, I'll leave it open for any questions.
Andrew.
So as we push towards zero emission for heavy duty, we still need CNG for heavy duty to get the 0.02 trucks deployed. So sort of what's
So
the balance and going forward? How do we?
So the Clean Fuels program focuses on pushing the technologies into commercialization. The 0.02s are commercialized,
Okay.
and they're part of the incentive programs now. So they can be incentivized for the different fleets. Now they're not as competitive as they used to be in the incentive programs, because the cost-effective calculations, like under Moyer, has given more funds towards the zero emission trucks. Cost-effective calculations.
Any other questions at this time for Aaron?
I had a
Yes, Bill.
question. Having read the paper this morning, there was an article about Biden announcing funding to replace cranes at ports due to cybersecurity concerns because they're made in China. And apparently they're going to replace these with a crane manufactured in the US by a Korean company, but they'll be locating the facility to produce them here. Is there any opportunity there to do away with the emissions from the existing cranes as they're replaced? And is the district tied into that in any way?
Yeah, we'll have to look at the announcement that you read on what the funding looks like for that.
I think it was 20 billion.
20 billion.
Yeah.
Almost pretty substantial.
Mhm. Nationwide.
There is, on the technology side for some of the cranes, like the rubber tired gantry cranes right now, those are the leeway to build those is several years. And replacing them is a big deal because they're large. And we found that you cannot add batteries to those because they travel. Adding a line to them to plug them in is not feasible for those. So there are some demonstrations right now on those on the fields, and that's a good fuel cell application. So, that's something we're trying to demonstrate more, get those in the commercial markets. They don't require the diesel engines for those types of cranes. So it depends on the crane, on the technology readiness on those, but certainly we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Anyone else? All right, well, we look forward to that. This is our annual report from TAO, and they're always doing great and exciting work. So we look forward to hearing about that next month. Okay, on to agenda item number 24. John, do you want to touch on the professional?
Hi, good morning. Yes, this is a placeholder item for a new 4-year MOU with the Professional Employees Association. So they're going through the ratification vote process right now. We should know by the end of the day whether or not that gets approved by them. The judge will bring it to the board for the second. Open Q4. How do you guys think?
Great. Any questions for John on that agenda item?
So the vote is happening today. Will that mean if there's any issues that'll come off the agenda before it's officially posted?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, that's that. I saw that. I assumed that, but I appreciate the update. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Good question, Mark. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great. So if we could turn back to the beginning of the agenda for the March board meeting. So we'll be setting hearing for our proposed amendments to our Rule 1118. I can touch on that. This is our refinery flare rule. We're going to be focusing on a number of elements, but I'll just kind of touch on some of the key ones. One of the first ones we're going to be doing is making the SO2, the SOX performance target a little more stringent on that. As a result of doing that, we're going to be seeing 50% reduction from SO2 or sulfur dioxide emissions. Very exciting. This is also fulfilling a SERP objective to meet some targets at 50. We're exceeding that as well as a numerical mass target as well. The other thing we're going to be doing is introducing a new NOx threshold. We have not had this before. This will be mainly focused on the hydrogen flares. Typically, hydrogen flares, because of their low sulfur concentration, are not regulated under the performance target for the SO2. So it's establishing a new target for them. And thirdly, we'll be establishing a new annual throughput threshold for what's called a clean service flare. These are liquefied petroleum gases. So typically like propanes and butanes and those sorts. Those are, again, separate flares. You handle them a little bit differently as well. And we'll be looking at setting up a standard there. Finally, we decided to take another look at the mitigation fee. As a reminder, what the standard does is it requires, if it gets exceeded, for refineries to submit a flare minimization plan. It sets a course on how they don't exceed it again the following year. What actions that they could take, we're providing them the flexibility to decide what those actions should be. They obviously need, at some point, it needs to be proved up. But in addition to that, as sort of a ensures or disincentive, the rule established a mitigation fee, and that's been there for since 2005. But the actual value of that fee has not changed. So there's been a question of like, is it really a deterrent, right? So we decided to take a look at that fee again and apply the CPI over the years and what that fee would be currently updated to. And we'll be proposing that as well in the rule. Yes, Ron.
I don't understand the SO2 issue because we're at 10% of the federal standard for SO2, and there is no standard for the sulfates, but it's a carbon, right? And we're about 60% or 80% below the sulfate standard from the state. Why do we care about SO2?
Right. So, SOX is also, we have concerns with that. It's a precursor pollutant. And also when you look at where the performance levels are at these refineries, some of those refineries are actually meeting they've taken actions, they've put on, different beneficial use type projects, things like that. So basically by changing that metrics, it kind of gets everyone to look at their emissions. They are some high mass emissions coming from the flare. So, and it becomes achieved in practice. They can do that.
But we're still way below the federal standard.
Yeah, and just reminded me, this was also a commitment in the SERP to look at the SO2 emission reductions. And we're achieving that. 50%. Yes.
So it's a precursor to PM. So we're in non-attainment for PM 2.5.
Right.
So
How much would it affect then the PM10?
I don't think we've crunched that. Don't we sort of looked at the modeling on that one?
So it's, the EPA proposed new PM that targets 9.0 microgram per meter cube. So the current, on top until that, the standard was 12.0 microgram per meter cube. So obtaining this new standard is going to be really challenging. We need to get all PM2.5 precursors. SOX, SO2 is very potent near the vicinity, near the source of the emissions.
Can you define real important?
How much?
Yeah, that's a good
How
question.
important?
Yeah, like to what degree?
What part of the inventory?
And
we
part of inventory. So SOX emissions mostly coming from refineries or ocean vessels. So as a stationary source, for the stationary source wise, as the refineries located near the coast has almost like 40% of the entire inventory or 50% of the entire inventory. So reducing emissions from those sectors are really critical. And then the other big contribution comes from ocean-going vessels, which is the federal source.
Not to belabor this, but so this new standard would affect PM10 to what degree? 2.5. To what degree?
Yeah, I don't think
And
sort of,
just exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think we've calculated.
we haven't
that.
calculated.
Oh, yeah, we don't know the
Yeah.
level of reduction. We do not know exact level of reductions needed to meet the new standard. That's the plan.
Yeah, I think his question is for proposed amendment rule 1118 for the reduction in SOx. What is the impact on PM 2.5? And we have not calculated that. But we do know that
Oh.
it'll help to benefit
Yeah.
to reduce the overall PM 2.5.
How do we know
Want to know
that?
how much?
Well, if we don't know how much, how do we know it does anything?
So the purposes for the SO2 and the SOx for the commitment in the AB 617 Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach Community Emission Reduction Plan. So it had asked for 50% reduction in SO2. And so that's what this part of this rulemaking is to address. But in addition to that, it will also get the concurrent PM 2.5 reductions is what Barbara was highlighting. So then you're asking how much, and we haven't calculated that.
But once, I'm sorry, to keep going, but if we know it does, we must know something about it, like how much it does affect it, if we know it does affect it, right?
We do know that. But the question you're asking and the way that I think we're thinking about it is we have to look at the total emissions and understand what those particular impacts are as we move forward to try to reach the new standard. And we haven't gone through that modeling yet. And in part, we haven't gone to that modeling yet because that is what happens when EPA makes those designations. So we're just starting to go through that. But from a pure background perspective, we know what happens from a chemistry perspective. And that's why we're talking about the precursors, the formation in the air. And to Susan's point, the PM around the refineries in those communities, that's what's driving this issue. Your question is much more complex and nuanced than what we need to do for the communities as part of the AB 617 process. But we will have a more detailed quantitative answer to your question. It's just we don't have it right now. Sorry, that's not satisfactory, but that's the
Bill,
truth.
Bill, could we get Deborah? I saw she had her hand raised. Sorry. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, I have a question on the fourth aspect that you were talking about, the mitigation fees, because we often hear from the community in particular that mitigation fees do nothing to reduce emissions. And so the question is everything under this rule already technically feasible for the refineries, or are we offering mitigation fees just to, allow them to comply under that, which really doesn't do anything to reduce emissions?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question, Deborah. Thank you. I think it's kind of in two parts. First off, again, we can only work on information that we already know, right? So we studied the last, 12 years of flare behavior out the refineries. So that's where we kind of base our conclusions as we move forward. We don't know what their flaring is going to look like in the future, but by generating a standard, what it does is it kind of keeps them in check of if they're going to exceed that standard, what action should they take? So to answer your question with regards to some meat, yes, actually some refineries have already taken action in the past to, let's say, construct a cogeneration unit, right? So that they can send the gases to there and generate electricity. Very expensive project, super expensive. Their own choice that they've made in the past to do that, but that's what they would have done. Some of those types of facilities might already be meeting that standard. Others, maybe not. So that's why there's a mix there. With regards to the usage of those mitigation fees, they do go into a special fund. They don't go to our general fund. They do go to a special fund for things like emission reduction type projects. And a couple of years ago, we had a big RFP that sponsored some of those.
Talk about how the mitigation fee has reduced the amount of flaring.
Right. So again, to kind of go back to how the standard is structured, if you exceed the standard, it's two parts to two things they have to do. One, they have to submit a plan to look at what was the specific cause of that exceedance in the flaring, so they can take action. Okay. In addition, then they pay the mitigation fee. So those are the two things. They're not in violation. No violation notices are being written of the exceedance of the standard, but there is force of action. The idea is for the mitigation fee is if in the following year they've decided not to do anything, they're going to be exceeding the standard again, and it's, you know, repeat. So I think that's where it's effective, as Susan's saying, because almost all the studies that we have seen, when they've exceeded that standard, that following year, the numbers went dramatically down at the refineries. So and we've talked to them, and they are doing things. They don't want to pay the fee. So
Yeah, we have seen that the mitigation fee has been effective. And then just a little background information about flaring. Flaring is not something that refineries want to do. It's a safety aspect. It's, you know, kind of that relief valve to when there is an issue and that pressure that they have to flare whatever product might be in the line, so there's not an explosion. So it is a safety feature, but it is an unfortunate situation because the community sees this, you know, large flame, there's the emissions, and so we're trying to control it the best that we can.
Do we have any examples? You have monitors for some of these little communities, which I've never quite understood what they're monitoring. But do you know what are we dealing with sulfate issues primarily in regard to local impact when you talk about local impact? In regard to flaring.
So the flaring emissions is like, there's, you know, that question. Then I'm not sure if you're asking about the 1180 monitors.
I guess I am. I don't know. I just see they have a bunch of monitors in the west side. But what I do know is that last year, it was central Orange County that had the highest sulfate readings in the basin. I don't think refiners are going to be impacting that. It doesn't seem very logical being that the onshore flow is to the east, not to the southwest. That's one thing. And I want to go back to this money thing. 317.1 is the same sort of thing, right?
those are the Clean Air Act non-attainment fees.
Right, and non-attainment. But that money, I mean, it seems that the industrial part of the generation of pollution is paying a heavy cost when they are fairly minor. Maybe not for sulfate, but I found it curious that Anaheim would have higher sulfate, so there must be other areas that are putting out SO2 that are impacting it. I don't know if diesel, I don't know if diesel has SO2. Anyway, that's just.
Yeah, okay, there was a lot there. But just to highlight that the 317, by the way, is for major sources of greater than 10 tons per year of NOx or VOC, so.
But those major sources are almost the entire industrial segment.
Well, could be, yes, they're large sources of emissions, but that's all set out by the Clean Air Act. Bill, did you have a
I
question?
did have a question on this. Is this going to help reduce frequency of odors and smoke around some of the refineries in the communities? Or is this completely disconnected from that? I mean, if they operate flaring, as you say, is due to an upset or some
Right.
uncontrolled condition. So if this gets them to control the process better,
Right.
such as you were talking about with cogeneration, something, would that not improve the picture with odors and smoke and so forth, some of these communities?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you just keep in mind, just in general, right? When you're reducing the level of emissions, you're reducing what you're exposed to, whatever the pollutant might be, right? So whether it's a sulfur one or CO or VOC, whatever, if you're by reducing that, you are reducing what those potential odors are. Now, odors are interesting, right? Because they transport themselves differently. They come from different sources. And so, but definitely the short answer for this would be yes, but I also think we recognize that we're putting on a comprehensive program here, right? At the district. So you'll be seeing a lot more rules coming out, and we've already started already with the OGIs, the optical gas imaging, searching out those leaks, for example. All of those add up, all of those little pollutant, sources, and identifying those sooner and correcting them and whatever the cause of those. All of that is part of a more comprehensive plan. And yeah, they will have odor benefits.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kloss, for your presentation. My question is similar to Deborah's. You did say that you're looking at mitigation fee, and is it really a deterrent? So what are you looking at? Are you looking to increase that? Who decides how much? Have you guys done a study of why it's not working, or how can it better work? How can it better be a deterrent?
Right, right. No, it's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, on one hand, we do think that it's worked effectively as a deterrent, because again, the data shows that they have made those reductions. But on the other hand, there's, again, the fee, some stakeholders have said this fee's like been forever. At some point, it's not going to be, and that's the worry, right? So, and it's recognizable that every other fee rule that we increase on CPI. It makes sense to look at it from that perspective and adjust accordingly.
And
So
who
it can only do
decides-
better, right?
Right. Who decides if we increase that fee? Is it,
That's part of the
Board
proposal.
ultimately
The board,
decides.
yeah, thank you.
would that be part of this public hearing?
Yes, yes. Yes, those fees are actually in the rule,
Okay.
so they will be adjusted upwards. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Deborah?
Yeah, just one more question. So, you know, this is just a set hearing, and I understand that. So there's still a lot of back and forth. I know there's been some communication from both sides. Where are you? What's your sense on the rule as far as the various communities? Is there, you know, are you close, or are we going to have, 100 people here telling us don't even set the hearing yet?
That's a very good question, Deborah, because we're actually meeting with some of the enviros today on some of their issues that they want to raise with us. So we haven't really flushed it all out in our conversation with them. Tentatively, if you were at the committee meeting, there was some comments, made from a community group, and that, we took those to heart, went back to the sort of the drawing board and sort of said, okay, what they're asking for, can we do that? We do think there's some limitations on there, but we have some ideas for them as well. So, we're hoping not to, of course. We do think this is a good rule. We think it's a good proposal. We think it's a balanced approach and moving forward, but we'll have to hear them out.
Can you comment on this as comments as well? Whisper, didn't they just send a letter?
They did just send a letter.
Yesterday.
They're one of, pardon?
Go ahead.
We
Yeah.
did get a letter from WISPA. As you can imagine, they have kind of the opposite take of what environmental stakeholders feel, and they think we're pushing too far. We shouldn't go quite as low on the limit. They're also asking for a little bit more time for us to reduce those performance standards. So we have actually made some adjustments based on their comments. We've been meeting with them as well as the environmental community.
So I guess the question is there a reason we have to set this rule? I know we've got a lot of rules coming up, but if one of the things that becomes difficult is when we're trying to write a rule during a governing board meeting. So, is there a reason we have to have this rule set hearing for 30 days?
Well, I think staff is still trying to see if, they can resolve these issues. And I think we just have to see where we are, but, it's like, as we did present to stationary, felt like there's things that we can address. And so I think we'll see where we are. It's kind of when we get to this point here where folks start, making additional comments. So we'll see how significant and, what we can address. This is a SERP action for Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach. They're in the fifth year. We're trying to get this one done, to incorporate to address it. So we have 5 years to implement the SERPs.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. Anyone else? Okay, I'm off the hot seat. All right. Let's move on to agenda number 3. Barbara, do you want to address the conflict of interest code?
So, state law requires local public agencies to have a public conflict of interest code, which specifies the positions which are required to fill out a disclosure form every year and ensure that they don't take any action that would constitute a conflict. This is just an update on some of the position classifications within the district that are being added to the code to bring it up to date to more recent position identifications, and it's a routine item. Take any questions, if any.
Any questions for Barbara?
Even us nobodies have to fill out 700s.
I'm sure you all do, I think, right? Yes, you're all pretty familiar. Okay, next up, we're gonna move to agenda item number 4, which deals with zero emission class 8 freight, dredge trucks, etc. Aaron.
Yeah, this is just to basically make changes to our BW mitigation trust program. So we've been administering this since 2020, 2018. This is a result of the settlement from the Volkswagen diesel issue with the TDI diesel engines they had on in place. So we administer this program for Class 8 trucks, combustion freight and marine throughout the state. Other air districts have different sectors involved in this. So far, since this was originally set up, the incentive amounts for the repowers and replacement of this equipment were not great enough really for this program to be utilized to the extent that it should be. So we've been working with CARB to increase the incentive amounts, which there's basically a 20% increase in incentives towards these sectors. And then also the change to the program is going to allow stacking with other incentive programs like AQMD. So there's a much bigger push, bigger incentive to use this program for these categories. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of comments, not mostly actually related to ARB, the way this program has gone along. I was still here when this program started, and I remember we were arguing that the amount for funding was low, so the applicants wouldn't take advantage of it. It was 85,000 compared to 100,000 with other programs. And at that time, ARB said, well, this is a court order. We cannot do otherwise. We have commitment to reduce NOx by 10,000 tons. And then now they have increased the funding amount. This money has been sitting there. They saw we were correct. It's been sitting there for 5 years. Now they have come with a memo that our commitment is not 10,000, it's 6,500 tons. I wonder how ARB went around that by arguing that they went from 10,000 requirement to 6,500 while it was a court order, and how that would affect their commitment to our AQMD. I know it's a mouthful and it's ARB's part, but it definitely affects us in an indirect way. The second part question I have, although they have increased the funding amount, it seems like they are late each time. I still don't think this amount is adequate. They are proposing $102,000 for near zero emission trucks, while we can provide $160,000 to Moyer and other programs. So again, it's like 5 years ago, the amount has increased, but it hasn't increased enough. That money is going to be sitting there. They are saying you can stack the funding, which is a good change. It wasn't there before. But they are mentioning stacking of local and state funds, not federal funds. I wonder what local or state funds are available to stack with near zero emission trucks. The HVIP is there for zero emission, but not for near zero. So my worry is that this money is going to be sitting there again, and we're going to go through the same cycles. On the zero emission side, where you can stack it with HVIP, that's a good thing, but it's also very complicated. I think you have to work very closely with other air districts, because this program we implement for the states, not just for our South Coast AQMD. And then this is an RFP or program announcement, while HVIP is on a first come, first serve. I remember I did electric school buses a few years ago where I combined HVIP with this, and you really have to work closely with ARB that they set aside funding from HVIP for this program, because their money is first come, first serve. You may encounter a situation where you have applicants here, then they're going to come and say, oh, our money is exhausted. You have to wait for the next cycle. And then the projects are going to fall through. Just comments for you to consider.
Yeah,
Thanks for those insights.
And the program's still going to have its challenges So we're hoping this does make some difference, but we think there's probably more change.
But the most curious part for me is how ARB justified the court order to go from 10,000 tons of NOx to 6,500 by issuing a memo.
Yeah, my understanding, the way they did the calculation originally was a little bit suspect.
Maybe they redid their work, their friend, I'm not sure. All right, agenda item 5. Aaron, do you want to touch on that one? This is
Yeah,
on.
so this is a program we'll be supporting with the Clean Fuels Program, and basically it's working with the Electric Power Research Institute. So the partners involved, like ABB, Southern California Edison, is to develop a SAE, Society of Automobile Engineers approved megawatt charging system for Class 8 zero emission battery electric trucks. So right now, these Class 8 battery electric trucks are typically charged, if you're lucky, you have a 250 kilowatt charger. Depending on the state of the charge of the truck, take 4 hours to charge the truck. If you have a megawatt charger in place and the truck battery can handle the system, you're looking at 20 minutes ideally for this charge time. So this is getting ready for that type of system, setting up the standard, and then there'll be once they develop the standard in the demonstration unit, there'll be one at SEE's test facility over in Irwindale, and the other one's going to be put at a pilot or TA travel center over I think in Ontario. And Cabin Street.
What's the range on battery electric heavy duty these days?
Depends on the OEM, but generally over 200 miles right now.
Really? You're getting that.
Depends on your load also.
And the grade that you're driving.
And the grade.
And the temperature.
That was one thing they didn't talk about with the whole Tesla thing in Chicago was like, how did those people stay warm? Because running a heater takes a lot of power.
Wait, Andrew.
I didn't hear, are the locations decided or not yet?
With the two chargers, yes, one's at Edison's test facility, Irwindale, and the other one's at Travel Centers of America, and I think that's in Ontario, somewhere.
Great. Any other questions for Aaron?
So this is like initial development. How does the battery behave when you jam that much juice? And
There's still some catch up on the OEM side. They have to build the trucks that can handle this megawatt charger, so that's also in development right now.
Okay.
Don't stick your finger in that socket.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Aaron. All right, agenda item number 6. Ron's gonna brief us on what you're doing, amending things in information management.
Yeah, this is the standard request to amend contracts for additional systems development. Funds are in the budget. Answer questions.
Okay, then we'll group them up then to the items on the receive and file. So these are the legislative reports, hearing board, IGR, rules.
Rule control.
So from agenda items 7 to 13.
And rule.
And then there's 11, the Mark question.
We didn't hear your mark.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, just the one that I always ask about. And I did notice that one of the rules is being moved now. Was it 1146.2? That's moving, right?
That's correct. Yes, that's just moving off a month. We're just addressing a provision. We're just addressing a potential enforcement. We want to make sure we've kind of tightened that up on that role.
Any other movement?
The only other one is actually we removed Rule 301, the fee one from the June board meeting. We were gonna address how 317 is reflected in it, but knowing we're taking 301 the month before, we worked with legal on how we can actually just get that done the month before and just don't have to bring it back to the board in June.
Right, and that we're going to be seeing those the budget presentation probably in a month. In May. Okay.
Yeah. That goes to the board in May. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You bet. Anybody else? Okay. Should we move on then to committee reports, agenda items 14 through 19? I'm not quite sure how to answer any questions on those, but.
ARB up to anything interesting? Okay.
Sure.
We'll get to look at it when.
Okay. All right then. So that completes our review of the agenda for the March board meeting. Okay, for your meeting here, you have An other business? Any other business? You guys want to bring up?
Couple of little questions. Do we know anything about the Cummins settlement yet? Because that was actually bigger than VW, right?
When you say, what, do we know anything? What do you mean?
I don't know, we got a ton of money from VW. I assume we'll get a ton of money from this. How are they sort of deciding now there?
Well, go ahead, Eric.
What was it? What was it?
It's 1.3 billion, I think. 1.2 billion
For the,
Cummins.
for Cummins.
oh, Cummins,
The nationwide settlement.
1.6 billion.
Yeah, I just figured they're just now talking about how to.
Yeah.
So I think California, their settlement amount is like 350 million or 400 million. So they have a separate settlement. My understanding, at least from what's on their website for CARB, is they're gonna put that settlement funds towards locomotives.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Oh, and
Okay.
the Metrolink press release, the zero emission, what kind of locomotives are those? Are they-
Still to determine, likely Siemens, possibly fuel cell battery. People consider Germany.
That's super interesting.
Anything else? Andrew, any other business? Yes. Takers?
I wanted to ask about the explosion, the truck that exploded in Wilmington with the clean, it was a CNG truck. I wanted to know if we looked into that, how that happened. I know that they were waiting for another tank to possibly explode. It had two tanks or something like that. I don't know. I just remember hearing that in the news.
Yeah, we're monitoring that very closely. And we're trying to understand when we see the report when it comes out of what actually happened. You know, we don't know if those tanks were damaged. If they actually had to be replaced, and you're supposed to replace these tanks every so often. It may also be that, you know, sometimes the first responders, you know, they're doing their job essentially, and safety is paramount for these new technologies, but the safety systems may have malfunctioned there. Throwing water on the temperature sensor may have cooled the sensor off, and the tanks were still being heated up by the fire. So it needs to be, investigation needs to happen. We need to understand what happened there. So it doesn't.
Is that something that, I don't know if that's a role that we would take on with the county, or the fire department to be educated on how to handle those types of fires, or how to, since we're coming up with new technologies and new types of gas.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if the fire department, or firefighters were.
Like, you know, all these projects that we have, the first fuel cell locomotive freight project, we were very close with the Federal Rail Administration, and the fire departments that are being in those areas will be, you know, they have to be trained by the OEM that makes that locomotive. So there is training that does happen for these technologies. And it's a good question whether the first responders there have been trained on this technology also, how to respond to it. So
Yeah.
we will be monitoring this very closely.
Okay.
I don't recall hearing about an accident like this before.
I've never seen anything in this show.
That's be to the firefighters that were hurt. But I believe last I heard they were in stable condition. So good. Good. Okay.
Well, I do remember there's a fire at a warehouse, and the battalion chief or captain on scene didn't want his guys going on the roof because that's still a lot of electrons coming off those solar panels. But
Yep, fire isn't good. Okay, anything else for other business? Okay, then, next agenda item is public comment. Sort of what, lacking our audience this month. Ron, did we have any public comment?
Yes, we have Mark at Longmont.
Great. Okay, Mark, can you hear us? And are you there?
I can. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Hi, this is Mark Abramowitz with Community Environmental Services, and happy to see my former colleague, board assistants there. But long before you folks knew me as Joe Lou's board consultant, I was 40 years ago, this year is the 40th anniversary, I sued EPA successfully, challenging the SIP. Now, this year you have this contingency measure coming up. And the one thing that is the same between both of them is that staff back then said that we're doing everything we can. And now you heard from staff today that, well, we're doing everything we can. So, you know, we're going to show impossibility on this contingency measure. And as I had said at a public consultation meeting, there are a number of things that the district can do to further reduce emissions. And so at the request of the Mobile Source Committee chair, I'm going to be sending a letter and describing some of those, but they have to do with fixes or changes to how the district implements BACT, additional technologies where standards could be made tighter to reflect how some standards, there are some overperformers in there. So I just wanted to give you folks a heads up that in my view, when staff says we're doing everything we can, there's a whole list of things that folks in the public know that can be done. Lastly, I just wanted to kind of cut off my thoughts on that to respond to Ron's question about why we need to be concerned about SOx emissions. And SOx is a very potent asthma trigger. So it's entirely possible that those living near refineries, those in the AB 617 areas, will have significant impacts from belches of SOx coming from flaring incidents. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the comments. Do we have anyone else, Ron? I'm not sure I see any other hands. Okay. Anything else anybody wants to raise? Okay, then. I guess
The parts meeting today is not going to be webcast, correct?
No.
It looks like it's super technical, so.
Yeah.
But interesting.
You'll have time to get there if you leave right now.
It'll take me 6 hours to get home.
There is that.
Yes.
That's why we don't have Miss Sarah here. Okay, so I guess the fourth agenda item here is adjournment. Okay, there we go. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
That's what.
Okay. Bye, Mark. Bye,
Yeah.
Deborah.
Oh, very nice.
And there was some other, that was interesting.
Go, Bill.
Good job, Mike.